What is the ideal class size for language learning? Well, once you've understood that the main purpose of language classes is to practice your speaking and to receive corrective feedback, then it becomes a matter of simple arithmetic to understand that the smaller the class size, the better. Let's take a simple example of a teacher giving a 1 hour, well managed conversation class. So maybe the teacher will spend about 10 minutes in total with introductory remarks, concluding remarks, motivating and guiding the students. And so the remaining 50 minutes will be used exclusively by the students to practice speaking and to receive corrections and other useful feedback. So if there are 2 students in that class, then assuming they divide time equally, it's never quite the case, but just for the purposes of this example, let's make that assumption. Then they each spend about 25 minutes with intensive speaking practice, which, as I've said before, this is akin to deliberate practice in any realm of study or endeavor, right? And deliberate practice is key to mastering a skill. So they each get 25 minutes. Now, if you had 5 students in that same class, then each student would get on average 10 minutes of speaking, which is 60% less, but it's still a reasonable amount. Now, let's say there were 15 students in the class. Well, in that case, I would say don't waste your time, because each student's going to get on average just over 3 minutes of practice speaking, of intensive practice, right? Now, on the other hand, if there were just 1 student in the class, an individual class, then that student would get a whole 50 minutes of intensive speaking practice and corrective feedback. So it's as simple as that. The smaller, the better in terms of efficient language acquisition. All other arguments that people will give are either subjective, off base, based on false assumptions, or not necessarily related to efficient language acquisition. In the traditional model of language instruction and education in general, you had a professor, teacher, specialist lecturing to a group of students, and they would passively listen and take notes. Now, that model was never made any sense for language acquisition, because unlike academic subject like history or linguistics, which you can basically learn just by listening to a great professor speak, with language acquisition, you need to practice. You need to be engaged in active practice. You need to speak. So that model just doesn't make any sense. Not nowadays, even for traditional academic subjects, that model is really becoming obsolete, because you can watch the best professors giving polished TED Talks or classes online anytime on YouTube or other sources. So let's set that aside. Now, a common argument that I've heard is that it's useful to be in a class with a group because you hear other students' mistakes and the corrections. Well, that's just inaccurate as far as I'm concerned, right? Because in the best case scenario, you'll learn something, but it's an incredibly inefficient way of improving your fluency. And worst case scenario, and this will happen to some extent, you will actually pick up some of those other foreign students' mistakes, whether it be pronunciation, grammar, because they're not all getting corrected, right? So you're going to pick some of that up. And so it's really inefficient. Another case that's made for group classes is regarding the enjoyment of the social interaction of being in a group conversation class. Well, that's a valid argument. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with efficient language acquisition, but in terms of making friends and having a fun experience, it's certainly valid. Perhaps the most important argument that's given in terms of or in favor of larger group classes is the cost of private classes, right? So one-on-one classes are going to be very expensive, and if you have large groups, well, the cost is going to go down. If that argument is associated with the previous one, so I enjoy group, the social dynamics of a group class, and I want to pay a lower amount, then having small group classes can be valid, can be a good way to go, really. However, you should keep in mind a couple of things, even if we're talking about small groups. One is that you will have to proportionally increase the number of classes you have in order to make the same progress as you would have in a one-on-one class. So the cost reduction there is quite relative. And secondly, you have to factor in the cost of your own time. So whereas in certain circumstances, I would take a small group class, I wouldn't take a class with 15 other students, regular classes with 14, 15 other students, even if it were entirely for free, or maybe even if you paid me to do it, because my time is too valuable, right? And I'm only going to get a couple of minutes of practice in that class. Well, it's just not worth it. My time would be better spent in terms of language acquisition just watching a Netflix series in my target language, for example. So, what is the ideal class size? If you're looking to maximize efficiency, then it's definitely just you and the teacher, right? In other words, one student, individual, one-on-one classes. Now, if you enjoy the social interaction, you want to make friends, you want to have group conversation, then small group classes, I would say 2 to 6 students can be the right choice for you. And that's it for today about ideal language class sizes.